We all know about supreme gods, Zeus, Ra, Odin, but what about their daughters? In ancient pantheons, we often encounter deities who form families and belong to different generations. But today we'll dive into the mystery of two powerful goddesses from the Eastern Mediterranean, whose names have caused confusion and speculation for centuries. At one point, they were so popular that they even eclipsed their own mothers. Were they the same deity or two separate ones? Get ready to uncover the intriguing truths about Astarte and Anat. Let's start with Astarte. She is one of the most significant goddesses in the ancient Near East, worshipped by Phoenicians, Canaanites, Syrians, and even Egyptians. Her cult was widespread, and she was a goddess of many aspects. Astarte was revered as a goddess of love, fertility, and sexuality. She was a patroness of prostitution in some cults, but also of motherhood and childbirth. But Astarte also had a darker, more warlike side. She was also a goddess of war, a protector of cities, and a leader in battles. Imagine her as a combination of Venus and Mars in one deity. Her name originates from a Proto-Semitic root and is closely related to the Mesopotamian goddess Ishtar, which indicates deep cultural connections. Now let's turn to Anat. She is another powerful goddess whose cult was particularly strong in Ugaritic, an ancient city-state in modern-day Syria. Anat was known for her ferocity and uncompromising nature. In Ugaritic myths, Anat is the sister and lover of Baal, the god of storms and fertility. She is her loyal ally and often intervenes in battles to protect him or avenge him. Anat was an extremely bloodthirsty goddess of war. Texts describe her bathing in the blood of her enemies, adorning herself with the heads and hands of the slain. She was the embodiment of wild, untamed power. Despite her cruelty, Anat was also a goddess of fertility and hunting. She was revered as a giver of life, but also as a destroyer, the two sides of nature. And so we come to the big question. Are Astarte and Anat the same deity or two separate ones? The answers are complex and depend on the time, place, and cultural context. In some regions and periods, especially in Egypt, the two goddesses were syncretized. Their cults and attributes merged. Egyptians often perceived them as the same deity, incorporating elements of one into the other. Both were powerful goddesses of war and fertility. Both were associated with supreme male deities, Astarte with Baal or El, Anat with Baal. This similarity in roles and functions led to confusion and the merging of their identities. However, in other contexts, like Ugaritic, they were clearly distinct. Anat was Baal's sister, while Astarte was a separate goddess, albeit with similar functions. Their popularity was so great that at certain times they even overshadowed their own mothers or older deities, showing the dynamic nature of ancient pantheons.
Interestingly, the Egyptians seem not to have adopted Semitic stylistic nuances. For them, Anat and Astarte were not merely different aspects of the same deity, but two separate yet equally formidable goddesses of war. Can you imagine that? Two goddesses embodying ferocity and victory on the battlefield, side by side in the Egyptian pantheon. One papyrus decree even states, "Give him, Anat and Astarte, his two daughters." This shows how deeply these goddesses integrated into the Egyptian worldview, to the extent of being mentioned in official documents as if they were part of the royal family or bestowing blessings. But that's not all. By the 18th dynasty, Astarte underwent a remarkable transformation in Egypt. From a goddess of war, she also became a goddess of healing. This is an example of syncretism, the merging of different religious beliefs and practices. The Egyptians saw in her not only martial strength, but also the ability to bestow health and well-being. Both Anat and Astarte, along with another Canaanite goddess, Quadshu, bore the majestic Egyptian title, Lady of Heaven. This title was reserved for the most important and revered deities, emphasizing their high position in the Egyptian hierarchy. Even the mighty pharaoh Ramesses III called them his shield. This is an incredible acknowledgement of their power and protective role. The pharaoh, who was considered a living god, relied on these foreign goddesses for his protection and for the protection of Egypt. Of the two, Astarte seems to have been more popular in Egypt. She had her own priests and prophets, which is a clear sign of her deep rooting in Egyptian religious practice. This wasn't just a superficial acceptance. Astarte was actively worshipped and played an important role in the lives of ordinary Egyptians. But what happens when we go back to her roots? Before she became a goddess of healing and lady of heaven in Egypt, Astarte was worshipped in Canaan as a goddess of fertility, love, and war. Her cult was widespread throughout the Levant, and her characteristics were much more complex and sometimes contradictory. The Egyptian adaptation of Astarte is an example of how cultures influence each other, how deities can change their functions and meanings when they cross the borders of a civilization. It shows us how dynamic ancient religion was, and how even mighty Egypt was open to new ideas and deities. Our journey continues eastward, into the lands of ancient Moab. Here, amidst the desert landscapes, we find the first traces of Astarte, bearing the name Ashtar. She is not alone. She is associated with Chemosh, the national god of Moab. You can imagine her as his consort, an inseparable part of the Moabite pantheon. This early connection shows us how widespread the worship of goddesses of fertility and war was in antiquity. But the true rise of Astarte occurred to the west, in the flourishing Phoenician city of Sidon. Here, at the heart of maritime trade, Astarte began to gain increasing importance. And what's more, she even displaced Asherah herself, who until then had been the chief goddess of Sidon. Imagine this colossal transition. By the 4th century BCE, Astarte was already the undisputed supreme goddess of the city. But her influence didn't stop there. The kings of Sidon were not just rulers, they were also priests of Astarte. And their wives? They bore the prestigious title of priestess of Astarte. This shows how closely religion was intertwined with political power in Sidon. Astarte was not just a goddess, she was the guardian of the royal line, a symbol of the city's strength and prosperity. Here's where it gets really interesting. An inscription from the Sidonian king Eshmanazar reveals Astarte's full Sidonian name, Astartart Shembal, which literally means Astarte in the name of Baal. This is not just a name, but a direct link to one of the most powerful deities in the ancient Near East, Baal. But the most astonishing thing is that this connection between Astarte and Baal is not new. This name, linking her to Baal, was used north of Sidon more than 1,000 years earlier in ancient Ugaritic texts. The deeper we dig, the deeper these connections become, revealing a complex and interconnected web of beliefs in the ancient world.
Surprisingly, the Bible mentions Astarte only 9 times, far fewer compared to the 40 mentions of another goddess, Asherah. Her first appearance is in the early period of the Judges, where we read, "And they abandoned Yahweh and served Baal and the Ashtartes." This shows us that her worship was a problem for the ancient Israelites from the very beginning. One of the most interesting places associated with Astarte in the Bible is the city of Ashtaroth Karnaim in Bashan. Its name literally means Astarte of the 2 horns. Imagine an entire city dedicated to this goddess. This concept of the 2 horns isn't just a poetic metaphor. Archaeological excavations in Palestine have uncovered numerous figurines of Astarte that depict her literally with 2 horns. This is incredible visual evidence that confirms biblical accounts and gives substance to ancient texts. As for the name itself, Astarte or Ashtoreth, it originally meant womb, or that which comes from the womb. This is highly fitting for a goddess of fertility, isn't it? She was a symbol and inducer of life, just as her brother husband, the god Baal, was a symbol of male fertility. Together, they represented the vital force of nature. But here's where it gets interesting and a little confusing. It seems that the biblical authors may have deliberately conflated these two powerful figures, Astarte and Asherah. This confusion dates back to the Amarna letters in the 14th century BCE. The Israelite historian from the Solomonic era, for example, repeatedly refers to the goddess whose worship King Solomon introduced as Astarte, the goddess of the Sidonians. However, in previous studies, including my video on Asherah, we argue that this was actually Asherah. Why this discrepancy? It's possible this was a conscious decision. Perhaps the biblical authors wanted to unite or even demonize these two powerful foreign goddesses under one name, to emphasize the danger of idolatry and to promote the worship of Yahweh alone. After all, both were associated with Canaanite cults and represented a challenge to monotheism.
The Bible, our primary source for the history of Israel, repeatedly condemns idolatry and the worship of foreign gods. It mentions Astarte, Baal, and other Canaanite deities, but it doesn't give us a complete picture of how widespread their worship was among the Israelites themselves. This is where archaeology comes in, the science that unearths the past to give us tangible evidence. Less than a century ago, during extensive excavations in Palestine, archaeologists began to discover something truly remarkable. Not one, not two, but hundreds of terracotta figurines and plaques depicting a naked female figure. Imagine, by the early 1940s, over 300 such items had been found. These discoveries are scattered across all major archaeological sites in the region and cover a vast period, from the Middle Bronze Age all the way to the end of the Israelite monarchy. That's millennia of worship. One of the earliest and most common forms of these figurines are the so-called Astarte plaques. These clay plaques were found in the late Bronze Age strata of Tel Beit Mirsim, which scholars believe to be the biblical Debir. How do we recognize Astarte? Often, the goddess is depicted with raised hands, holding lily stems or snakes. And her head? It's adorned with two long spiral rings that are almost identical to those worn by the Egyptian goddess Hathor. Sometimes, she also wears a Philistine-type helmet. All these attributes clearly link her to the Canaanite and Egyptian pantheon, showing the strong cultural and religious influence in the region before the rise of Israel. Astarte was a goddess of fertility, love, and war, an extremely important figure for the Canaanites. But did her influence stop there? And here's where it gets really interesting. When archaeologists reached the later strata, those dating from the period of the Israelite monarchy, the nature of the findings changed. The female figurines they now found no longer bore the distinctive features of Canaanite goddesses, like Astarte. Instead, they have prominent breasts, but below them, the body becomes like a pillar. This puzzled scholars for a long time. Some of them suggest that these pillar figurines might have been small clay representations of Asherah. Why Asherah? Because the Bible mentions Asherim, sacred poles or trees that were associated with the worship of this Canaanite goddess, Baal's consort. The idea is that these larger Asherah images were carved from tree trunks, and these small clay figurines were domestic copies or references to them. Regardless of the exact identification, whether they are Astarte, Asherah, or another local fertility deity, one thing is certain. The archaeological evidence is undeniable. These female figurines were extremely popular among the Israelites during the divided monarchy. They have been found literally in every house, in every major city from this period. This proves that even in the homes of people who identified themselves as worshippers of Yahweh, there was a place for these goddesses. These findings demonstrate that the Israelites were not only exposed to these cults, but actively bought and used these female figurines for religious purposes. This challenges our understanding of monotheism in ancient Israel. It seems that it was not as pure and unambiguous as we often imagine. Rather, it was a complex process filled with influences from surrounding cultures.
Canaanite mythical material concerning Anat is abundant. She is the most important female figure in Ugaritic mythology. But what makes her so special? Imagine a goddess who is simultaneously of love and of war. Sounds paradoxical, doesn't it? She is virginal, yet at the same time promiscuous. She is prone to love, but susceptible to uncontrollable outbursts of rage and terrifying displays of cruelty. Daughter of the mighty El and Lady Asherah of the Sea, Anat was created with incredible strength and emotional depth, but her loving side often remains in the shadow of something much darker. Although she was a typical love goddess, Anat spent most of her energy on the battlefield. Let me be clear, no ancient Near Eastern goddess was more bloodthirsty than her. She was easily provoked to violence, and once she started fighting, she would plunge into such a fury that she simply struck down and killed right and left. Imagine the following scene, described in ancient texts. She strikes down the peoples of both the East and the West, so that their heads fly like sheaves and their hands like locusts. But her frenzy doesn't stop there. Not content with that, she binds severed heads to her back and severed hands to her belt. The climax of her cruelty? She immerses herself up to her knees in the blood of the troops and up to her thighs in the blood of the heroes. This is not just a metaphor, friends. This is a description of a goddess whose fury was so boundless that she instilled fear and respect even among other deities. Anat didn't just observe the battle, she was the battle. This bloodthirsty and warlike image of Anat also permeated Egypt. Yes, even in pharaonic Egypt, where her power was recognized and revered. There she was called by no less impressive titles. The goddess, the victor, a woman acting like a man, dressed like a man, and girt like a woman. This is truly amazing. A goddess who so clearly blurs the lines between genders, adopting masculine attributes of a warrior but retaining her feminine essence. She was closely associated with horses and chariots, symbols of speed, power, and war. And not just that, Anat was the protector of the pharaoh himself, with shield and spear. Imagine the power of that patronage.
The amazing fact is that the biblical authors seem to have called her by her epithet, Astarte, just as her brother and lover Baal is referred to by his epithet, Lord, instead of his proper name Hud. This is a clever strategy that allows these deities to be discussed without giving direct homage to their names. But there are more hidden clues that lead us directly to Anat. We encounter Canaanite cities like Beth Anath, which literally means House of Anat. And even more famous is the priestly city of Anathoth, the birthplace of the prophet Jeremiah. These place names are not coincidental. They are a clear indication of a deep connection to the goddess Anat, suggesting that her cult was widespread in these areas. And here's the most intriguing figure: Judge Shamgar, son of Anat. His only heroic deed is that he struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad and saved Israel. A big question arises here. Was Anat the name of Shamgar's mother, not his father? This is a tempting hypothesis. If Anat was Shamgar's mother, then in this brief biblical account, there might be a remnant of a much older myth. A myth of a son of the goddess Anat who inherited her warlike qualities. Anat was known for her ferocity in battle, often described as dancing in the blood of her enemies. Isn't it remarkable that Shamgar's only known deed is an act of extreme strength and violence? Although the name Anat is never directly spoken in the Bible as a foreign goddess, her traces are everywhere, in the names of cities, in the epithets of other deities, and most likely in the story of one of Israel's judges. This shows us how complex and multifaceted the religious environment in ancient Israel was, and how, even in texts that aim to eliminate foreign cults, their imprints remain forever. At the center of our story stands the prophet Jeremiah. He was unyielding in his conviction that the great national catastrophe that befell Judah, destruction, famine, and sword, was direct punishment from Yahweh for the people's idolatry. He saw this as a result of their apostasy from the one true God. But here's where it gets interesting. The Judean refugees in Egypt, with whom Jeremiah enters into a heated dispute, have a completely opposite interpretation. They believe the disaster is divine punishment, but not from Yahweh, but for a sin committed against the Queen of Heaven. They categorically refuse to listen to Jeremiah, declaring in Jeremiah 44:16-18, "But we will certainly do everything we said we would. We will burn incense to the Queen of Heaven and will pour out drink offerings to her, just as we and our fathers, our kings, and our officials did in the towns of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. Then we had plenty of food and were well off and suffered no harm. But ever since we stopped burning incense to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, we have had nothing and have been perishing by sword and famine." Just imagine! For them, abandoning the Queen of Heaven is what brought about the misfortune. The women even added, "Are we the only ones who burn incense to the Queen of Heaven and pour out drink offerings to her? Did we not, without our husbands, make cakes in her image and pour out her drink offerings?" This shows how deeply rooted this cult was in their lives, and with the active participation of the whole family. This unique passage gives us an incredible and extremely rare glimpse into the actual ritual of Jewish worship of Astarte, or the Queen of Heaven. This was not some secret, marginal worship. No, the whole family was involved. The children gathered wood, the fathers lit the fire, and the women kneaded dough and made special cakes for the Queen of Heaven. And not only that, these rituals were not performed secretly in some remote area. They were led by kings and princes and took place in Jerusalem and other cities of Judah. This suggests that the worship of the Queen of Heaven was official, or at least widely accepted during certain periods of Israel's history. And now to the most intriguing part. Is it possible that these cakes were in the shape of Astarte herself, perhaps with horns or some specific symbols? And an even bolder idea, is it possible that these cakes were eaten by the celebrants, perhaps as a precursor to the Holy Communion we know today? This thought becomes even more intriguing thanks to a recent archaeological find in Naharia, a 17th century BCE stone mold for casting small two-horned Astarte figurines. This discovery lends weight to the idea that goddess figurines, perhaps even edible ones, played a central role in these rituals. This story isn't just a dry fact from the past. It teaches us several extremely important things. First, it shows us the complexity of religious practices in ancient Israel, which were often much more syncretic than we imagine. Second, it gives us insight into the dynamic between the prophetic movement and popular religion, showing the strong resistance to monotheism. And finally, it makes us reflect on the role of female deities in ancient religions and how they were displaced or forgotten over time. The story of the Queen of Heaven is a powerful reminder that the past is full of surprises and that biblical texts often contain deep layers of meaning waiting to be revealed.
In their origin, Astarte and Anat were worshipped in Canaan, the land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. Astarte, often associated with Venus, was a goddess of love, fertility, but also of war. She was a symbol of the vital force that gives life, but also of the destructive power of battle. Anat, on the other hand, was known for her fierce and uncompromising nature. She was a warrior goddess who was not afraid to face any enemy, even gods. Her strength lay in her steadfastness and thirst for justice, or revenge. It is this contrast between life-giving power and destructive might that makes their stories so captivating. But the influence of Astarte and Anat did not remain only in Canaan. Ancient Egypt, always open to foreign cultures, quickly assimilated these powerful goddesses. Astarte was worshipped as a goddess of war and a patroness of horses and chariots, often depicted with Egyptian attributes. Anat also found her place in the Egyptian pantheon, often associated with Ramesses II and revered as his personal protectress in battles. This is proof of their universal appeal and the power of their archetypes. Astarte in Egypt, goddess of war, patroness of horses. Anat in Egypt, patroness of pharaohs. Perhaps most surprising is their hidden presence in biblical texts. Although monotheistic religions sought to eradicate polytheistic cults, the echo of Astarte and Anat can be found. The name Astarte appears in the Bible as Asherah or Ashtoreth, often associated with idolatry. But this shows that her cult was so strong that it had to be actively denied. Some scholars suggest that even elements of Anat's image, such as her belligerence and strength, may have influenced certain female figures in biblical narratives, albeit indirectly. A central question that continues to intrigue researchers is, are Astarte and Anat the same goddess or two separate ones? Some arguments point to similar attributes and cultic practices, suggesting regional variations of the same deity. Others, however, insist on their individual characteristics and roles, especially in early Canaanite texts. Nevertheless, their intertwining and mutual influence are undeniable. One goddess? Two goddesses? Their stories remind us of the deep human need for divine female figures. In a world dominated by male deities, Astarte and Anat were powerful symbols of female strength, fertility, but also of independence and warlike nature. They show how ancient beliefs continue to resonate, often in hidden and surprising ways in our culture and collective subconscious. These forgotten queens are not just historical artifacts. They are a mirror of our own perceptions of strength, femininity, and divinity. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the bell to not miss future revelations. Thank you for being with us.